Hello, welcome back to the Three Orcs channel. This series of videos I've been doing lately has been for the Viscounty of Verbobonc, which is used for the Temple of Elemental Evil campaign that I've been running for the last couple of years. As you can see on the screen here, I created this map, which is a zoomed in version of the Anna Meyer's map that I'm using for the world map. And this is more or less the eastern portion of the Viscounty, starting with the City of Verbobonc. On the map here, you see the City of Verbobonc sits on the Velverdiva River. And I created this map to extend east into the gnarly forest as far as Twilight Falls. Let's see if I can show you at the edge of the map there. I included all the small towns and roads that connect them. I created 1 mile hexes to be used for travel time, so it makes it very easy to follow the players in the campaign as they travel through the Viscounty. This video is going to be the full review of the City of Verbobonc. And as you can see, it's a clickable link here on my map, so I can open up the article and go straight to it. But before we do that, I just wanted to point out a few things about the map I made here. The 1 mile hexes I created for this map I use to track player movement through the campaign. As you can see, each village is generally between 10 to 12 miles apart. Penwick is the center of the eastern half of the Viscounty, which is on the border between Lord Melinius and Lady Eleanor's lands. If you count the hexes, it's roughly about 18 miles to Penwick. And running south of Etterbach is about 15 miles. I created this map by eye, based on the Anna Meyer's map with her hexes. And it's accurate within a few miles. I noticed a lot of discrepancies between the material from Goodman Games and the Living Greyhawk box set. So a lot of the information I got is from the new Goodman Games Temple of Elemental Evil box set for the module, which has a lot of vital information in here. I noticed their hexes are a league each, which is roughly about 3 miles per league. So the scale is completely off compared to other source materials that we have, like Anna Meyer's. And then, of course, I compare it to the box set that I have for World of Greyhawk. The World of Greyhawk box set map is Darlene, and I believe her hexes are a different scale as well. So I just basically created this map from scratch, loosely based on all that information, and I put my own scale in. So I don't expect it to be the same as a lot of other source material, including the Goodman Games. So let's go ahead and take a look at the work I did with the Verbobonc City. This is all based on an article I found on cannonfire.com and dragonsfoot.org. This was created by a person named Banesfinger back in 2003. I tried to contact him, but he seems to have disappeared off the internet. But his article is very valuable if you want to run adventures or start of a campaign from the City of Verbobonc. This document is extremely valuable if you want to create encounters or start the campaign from the City of Verbobonc. He has quite a bit of information from each district, the walls, the associations, the organizations. It's all here in a standard basic layout. I took this information and I broadened the scope of it for my campaign. And I added it to my world anvil so that way I can use it in my campaign much easier and link to these locations. So this is my article I created for my campaign for Verbobonc. This map came with that article from Banesfinger, and I have each location keyed. And so what I'll do is this little tab here will actually show the pins. So let's go ahead, and the base locations are those. And then I also have different pins categorized in different quarters of the city. Also, to stay organized, I created another article of different locations referenced by the type. So down below, I have all the taverns listed with links, and I have all the shrines, temples, and churches, all the stores, the guilds, the public buildings, the private houses and manors, military buildings, and also from his article, how to enter the city. From land, from river, precautions taken at the entrances, if somebody tries to use air teleport to get into the city. All that information was detailed in his article, and I just added it to my article so I can reference it easier. The links is what makes everything much easier, because if I need to look what a tavern has, all I gotta do is just go to the link, and a pop-up will appear, and I can look at the article, or I can actually right-click on that article, open it in a new tab, or just open it, and then the article will open up with artwork that I have. I keep a interactive map on every article, so reference, so I can navigate around the city easier. I have a description of the location, and then I have dialogue, and I also added flavor text for role playing. So when the party first gets to that location, I can read it to them and role play and riff off of that information. And then I usually have goods and services and other secret information down below. On the right is categories. So this location is part of the business quarter, B1 through B26, which is a pop-up, or I can right-click and open it to a new tab. And so let's go back to locations again. So these were all here for easy reference in case I want to. You can either navigate the city using the interactive map by putting your cursor over a location, and it'll describe. It will display the name of that location. If I left-click on it, I'll have some choices between a map and the category it's in, or the actual location it's in, which is the City of Verbobonc. So I'll click on the article itself, and I'll navigate to that article, replacing that last article. And so this is the new Church of St. Cuthbert being built, I believe. Yeah, the new Temple of Cuthbert, which is by the Market District. I have flavor text, notable people, who's in charge. So like the notable people, they have their own articles as well, like the bishop does. And I can read all about him. He's got flavor text as well, so I can describe the much easier and faster to the players, that NPC. And also references of any history or landmarks or anything like that. I make sure it has its own article, so I can click on it and get immediate and retrieve that information immediately for the campaign, because you don't know what the players are going to try to do when they're in the city. And this is so overwhelming. So much information is here. So many locations, NPCs and organizations, churches, cults, that it's hard to get all that information immediately when a player wants to go there all of a sudden, or asks a question like, who's your captain? Where is your captain? I need to talk to him. And you need to find out what barracks he's from, or one of the lords, or one of the churches. So it makes it much easier to find that information immediately. There's a purpose and function, goods and services, in case you want to go there for healing or buy something, like a potion or holy water, or whatever your campaign offers. I try to keep my magic for sale at a minimum. Only base items and first and level spells. And first and second level spells. So on the right-hand side is his parent location, who the owner of that location is, and the characters at that location. I usually try to add more NPCs besides the person in charge, like his subordinates, because usually the players will interact with them before they interact with the bishop. And I usually put the holy symbol down there and a picture of what the place looks like. So we'll go back. So we're looking at the interactive map of the City of Verbobonc. And what's great about this map is it has locations outside the walls too. So a lot of these are inns. The icons I used for these pins, I used the beer stein for inns, so I can immediately see what kind of location it is before I put my mouse over it. Also, there's temple, the red temple signs, and any kind of government locations. I use the gold. I used the Roman building, and I used the castle building for different locations. And the green is generally a shop. And the gray is city locations, like Office of the Harbor Master, Adventurers Guild, and we got stables down here. So I try to keep it somewhat organized that way. Well, what's great about his article, his map he made, is it's also keyed at the bottom. So you can actually look at the letters and find out the name of that location. But it's not interactive. There's no links. But it helps, I guess, if you look at the map. But instead of using that area at the bottom, the descriptions at the bottom, I created separate links to take me to those articles. All right, so another thing I want to mention before we continue about the city and the map is it's backwards. So if you look at the compass. I had to reorientate the compass several times to get it right. The only sure way to get the orientation of the map right is by reading the descriptions of the gates themselves, because they actually have compass directions in the description of that location. So after reading those carefully, I realized that north is south and east is west. It's all upside down. So as you can see, that the top half, the north half of the river, is the Gnome area. And that gate right here, going north, is in Thurandi. And south side of the city, that gate over here, pointing south, leads into the Viscounty along the high road. And then if you go to the east end, this H2, this exit, there's a road that runs parallel to the Verbodonc River. And we can look at that by looking at the map. And if you see the map here, this road, for some reason the gate called this a low road, but that's not what it's called. I'll have to change that for my campaign, even though the description in the original article doesn't seem to be right. So this road runs parallel to the Verbodonc River that runs all the way up off the map to Divers. It's a major caravan road that for travel to Divers and back, and along the small towns along the coast of the river and the border of the Viscounty. Also, the Verbodonc River is a major trade route for shipping, and a major port is in Verbobonc City. So let's go back to the location here. Okay, back to the map. So you can see the river. That's the Verbodonc River. It's got a port of entry here between the two towers guarding the mouth of the river. In the description of the walls of the city, it does talk about these small craft pulling merchant ships into the harbor, that they won't let them allow. The port authorities will not allow them to sail under their own power into the port. So they're like a swarm of locusts. As the ship approaches the city, these boats swarm out and guide and pull the ships into the harbor. And that's more described in the actual location there. This bridge that connects the north to the south is a bridge that rises, so the larger boats can pass underneath. Also, there's the bridge that crosses the river as well, of immense stonework here. As you can see on the north side, it's a lot of it's crumbled into ruins from a siege. I suspect that damage happened when the forces of Ardi from the Great Kingdom tried to invade hundreds of years ago, and then were driven back. And then on the other side, to the west, this port as well should continue onwards to the west, but it's hard to see around the corner of the castle here. And I see that there's a little bit of a mistake here, I believe, because that looks like the waterworks, and I know that's described as the ruined aqueduct. So there was an aqueduct there, and this description is the pond of the heart. Druids worship there, and this river is supposed to keep going to Valuna. So I'm not sure why he drew that in here. So that's a little bit off. Ships should be able to pass through here. So this side of the river is Gnomesburg. It's a small gnome village from back in history. Gnomesburg was one of the original settlements before the human migration of the Sul came to the area. I highly recommend getting this information of the history of the migrations of the different human nations hundreds of years ago from a website, from the YouTube channel, The Grey League. So The Grey League has amazing videos on the describing of the different cultures and the migrations of the different human tribes that came to the Flanaess over the years. And it explains very well the history of the migration and the villages and settlements over the years, and the areas that was fought over, and what happened to the elves and the gnomes and the halflings of the area when they moved in. Coming back to the map, Gnomesburg was one of those original settlements that was here before the Sul migration came to the area. And then the Elven Castle to the south of the river on the knoll there is the original Elven Castle before the migration. So this was a On the north side of the river was a gnome village. On the south was an elven city. So before we go into the articles, I'm just doing a review of the map itself. So dominating the middle of the city is this huge, massive cathedral. As for Trithren's cathedral. The reason they're so prominent in the city is because they were instrumental to the defense of the city when the Ardi forces of the Great Kingdom came to invade. Their paladins and knights are the ones that actually threw back those forces and defended the city. And so they're still remembered to this day as doing such. And they're a very important place in politics of the city. A step down from the Church of St. Cuthbert, because St. Cuthbert is the official religion of the city, supported by the lords and Viscount Wilfric. Near to the cathedral, there's many businesses and temples and universities. Behind the cathedral, which would be to the west, is the Elven district, called the Elven Enclave. It's this entire area right here that I'm focused on, to the walls. A lot of the buildings and homes are in the ip trees. They're very old architecture, elven architecture through there. The graphics don't necessarily reflect that, I see, but he did put vegetation, forest, bushes in the corner there to help, but it's not exacting. So this whole area was really an elven settlement originally, all the way up to the castle here. On this side of the map, more to the east, is the warehouse district and the market place, which is right here in this clear area. B7 is the new construction of the new Temple of St. Cuthbert. And then behind, to the south, these are all temples and churches and universities. And outside the walls, as far as the eye can see to the horizon, is the breadbasket of the Viscounty. Farms as far as the eye can see. It's flat until you finally get to the Cron Hills, some 30 miles to the south. They climb into the Lortmill Mountains that's snow-capped. And you can see that bordering the southern horizon in the distance. And then to the east is a dark, rich green carpet of the Gnarly in the distance, some 30 miles that way. So this is the article of Verbobonc itself. I have the map here as well, so I can use it to interact with while I'm looking at the article. The heraldry of Verbobonc is right here on the right. It's a green tree on a yellow background. I have an explanation here. The Viscounty of Verbobonc is a near independent province of the Archclerisy of Villuna, ruled in Palatine by a powerful Viscount. The town of Verbobonc itself is the second largest port on the Velverdiver River, bringing much wealth to the local lords. The reason I make this video is because not only is it a review of these locations, but how I use them in the Temple of Elemental Evil campaign. So it's interesting that the local lords are rich because this is a center of trade and industry between varied races and locations here in the Flanaess. The writ of the Viscounty of Verbobonc extends some 15 miles to the Cron Hills to the south, though the current gnome problems ensure that the Viscount holds little true power there. And that's another political situation here in the campaign where the people of Verbobonc have political issues with the gnomes to the south in the Cron Hills in the Greenway Valley. And Prince Jim of the gnomes is located here in his mansion, and he sits on the Council of Lords. And he was given that position when the gnomes agreed to help defend Verbobonc at the Battle of Emerald Meadows. That was one of the conditions that the gnomes required to support and help them, is to get a seat on the council. So right there is a lot of political intrigue, because some of the nobles, they might not be evil, but they're definitely greedy, and they always want to grow their power. And those rich gem mines and metal mines to the south, they're vital to the economy of the area. And the lords would love to get their hands on some of those mines, and the gnomes guard them jealously and keep them hidden as much as they can. So, the relationships with lords of the neighboring villages and strongholds within the Viscounty are not nearly as tumultuous. Viscount Wilfric, inattentiveness during the later part of his reign, has ensured that some of the local rulers have more power than they ought to have, a problem So this last sentence is not my campaign. My campaign is in the year 576 Common Year, and a lot of this information, including the Verbobonc article I referred to earlier, was written for D&D 3.0 in 2001 for 3rd edition. And this last sentence refers to that because the current Viscount is Wulfric. And in one part, and sometimes that article always refers to another Viscount, so I had to change it. Verbobonc is not only a human city, but home to elves and gnomes as well. A few of the former lofted Ipt houses, structures built within the boughs of the trees of the same name. Most gnomes live in rents, small but comfortable dwellings excavated from the dozens of small hills within the city. The town is rich with trade. River brings goods of all stripe, with caravans and barges more than happy to leave the region loaded down with gems and copper from the local mines. Gnome smiths are renowned throughout the Flanaess. Arguably their most important structure, the Royal Furiandian Mint, spreads their handiwork farther than others. The local temper is mild, cold winters, little snow. People of Verbobonc are friendly but cautious, but have seen evidence of true evil in their lifetimes, and know that a stranger could easily slice your throat as much as look at you. The folk of Verbobonc have channeled their caution into a diligent work ethic. Hard work keeps the demons away. So, there's 14 freeholds and similar fiefs, all less than 500 square miles in size. The entire Viscounty is a bishopship under St. Cuthbert, the official religion of the Viscounty, and it's divided into 8 guardianships overseen by abbots. So it's a political fief. Common language, alignments is generally lawful good, neutral, and lawful neutral. So St. Cuthbert is the main religion here. Elona, I think, is a mistake. I think that shouldn't really be on this list, but where that would be worshipped at, she would be worshipped, of course, in the Gnarly Forest. And the Viscounty does extend into the Gnarly Forest. Zilchus, obviously, the god of money and wealth. Since this is such a merchant hive of trade, definitely that he would be worshipped. And also, I believe the bank is a church of Zilchus. Farlong is venerated here because a lot of people travel through the area to get around the Flanaess, and they have small shrines everywhere. Obadhai, he is a god of nature, cares little about human culture and human lands, and he protects and cares only about the forest and nature. He's only really worshipped in the Gnarly Forest. And then, of course, is Beri. Beri is worshipped by housewives and farmers and the community because he is the goddess mother. Beri is the goddess mother. Let's see. As you can see, is the greater goddess of earth, nature, and rain. It's the manifestation of the will of earth itself. So little concerns her except for the fate and prosperity of the entire world. So each god, of course, has its own article, so all I gotta do is to get a description. I can just put my mouse over it and take a look. Or I can open up the article and look at all the artwork. So the allies of the Viscounty is obviously Villuna. The folk of Villuna are long represented the best aspects of humankind. And then, of course, there's Firandi to the north. It's one of the oldest and most noble kingdoms on earth. I usually refer to it as the ancient holy kingdom of Firandi. This nation forms the backbone of the forces of good, and the stalwart enemy of is and evil. And then, of course, we have the Knights of the Heart. There's 3 branches. They're located in Firandi, Villuna, and the High Folk, and they're strong supporters of this region. And then we have the Cron Hills, which, of course, is a stretch in the Gnarly Forest and the Lort Mills. And that's where the home of the gnomes and many other villages in the area. Right, currently, the gnomes are distrusted. Technically, they're in rebellion at present. Divers, the free land, is closely tied to Verbobonc because of the trade. They rely on each other and do a lot of brisk trade between the two. Because they reach out from the City of Greyhawk all the way into Villuna. Of course, you have the enemies, which is, of course, Uis to the north. And he has agents everywhere, including here in Verbobonc and the Temple of Elemental Evil. The Pomars, the reason so is because they deal in slave trade, and they have ties with the Scarlet Brotherhood. They perform slave trade within the Viscounty and the city of Verbobonc. Some of the inns support that, the secret entrances and passages in and out of the city, and then they might even work with the local thieves guild. Also, there's some assorted evil cults, particularly Uis, Vecna, Zagamai, and Elemental Evil. So Uis has a cult, and his agents are everywhere. Vecna has a smaller cult, and they have a few agents in the area. There's a module based on that in this area. Zagamani is Zugmoy is obviously the Temple of Elemental Evil, the priest there. And then it refers here to the Elemental Evil, but what that really is the Elemental Evil God, or the Eye, and that's also the Temple of Elemental Evil. They're the ones that initially the players will become in contact with as they go around the lands, exploring, following quests, and going to different locations and handling problems that come up. And the bandits in the area are in direct employment of the Temple of Elemental Evil. And so it's the Temple of Elemental Evil politics and activities is like an onion. There's layers and layers and layers of activities, of things they're doing as they reach out to other organizations in the area to work with them to their own ends. And that's a whole entire video in its own, of course. But they have many agents here in the city as well. And some of them are the reason why the gnomes are having problems with the people of Verbobonc and Wulfric and the Lords. They kind of stir the pot of resentment there. Military. After the Treaty of Greyhawk, the Viscount Wulfric saw the need to overhaul and organize the army. Despite Verbobonc's distance from the battleground, he worried constantly over the struggle of Thirandi against the might of Uis. I agree with that statement. I do realize it comes from the Marklands of the year 593 Common Year, but it's still the case, though. They still had that thought before in the year 576. Furthermore, the Kattite invasion of Abyssal people of Verbobonc wanted desperately to be self-sufficient in defense, which is true all the time, especially after the war with the Temple of Elemental Evil. To do so, the standing militia expanded to 300 heavy cavalry, crossbowmen, and spearmen, twice its original size. I say that this happened after the Temple of Elemental Evil War. Further, the various lords and their vassals number about 50 knights, along with personal retainers. They're a distinct group. And then they have a thing called the Gentlemen of the Watch. That's from the article, too. So that's what they named the city guard. I don't necessarily care for that name for the city guard, but you're welcome to change it, and I do. I usually don't refer to them by that name. I just called them the city watch, the guards. Altogether, they account for more than 200 fighting men. A further 1,200 militia may be called up but approximately 400 per week. In a real emergency, another 1,000 peasants could be equipped with suitable weapons. There's also the provisional forces, which be called upon to about 5,000 light spearmen. So when it comes to the campaign, eventually, if the party doesn't do well, the Temple of Elemental Evil will rise, because if you read that module, they recruit weekly and grow until they get to a certain point where they're ready to expand and do more damage to the Viscounty. And eventually they're going to march upon the city itself and take it. So I guess this information would be important for later on in the campaign if it gets that far. And also, certain players in the group might have that military background, so they would have this information. They would know that. You know, like you have a fighter in the group that maybe was a militia man or a guardsman or a scout in the army. He would have information like this. So it would add a layer of stress to the campaign, to the players, if they knew this information. One of the Wulfric's innovations was to require that all militia, including the provisional forces, to dedicate 3 weeks of training for every 6 months. If a player's background is still active in the militia, this could come into play. that they're all of a sudden they're required to go attend this training. Doesn't mean that they have to be trained, but maybe they will be performing the training, when they get higher level. So that's something to think about. This was instituted by Wulfric as a way of bolstering the numbers and quality of the levy in times of war. However, it was met with resistance throughout the Viscounty. Lone exception was the township of Penswick. Also against Mayor Timoc's wishes. Currently, the mayor is Hax. Mayor Hax. From House Hax. So this is year 596 mayor. The year 576 mayor is Mayor Hax. Wulfric bestowed the duties of leading the militia and a chore which normally falls to the Lord Mayor, upon who fought alongside Wulfric in the Battle of Emerald Meadows. That's another article. And we have information on the actual battle, the numbers of the armies, the allied, the casualties, how the battle describes how the battle went and what was done and who came to their aid. So this entire history here. Instead of reading all this to the players, what I do is I created a music video. It's on my channel. It's called The Battle of Emerald Meadows. I produced it in a music studio with an artist, and I used a lot of the words I used for that song came from somebody on Canonfire. But you can read all about that on that video. So what I'll do is I'll play that video I'll play that video when the players are at an inn, role-playing encounter for like getting rumors and talking to NPCs and finding henchmen and procuring a room for the night and food. I'll have a bard come in and sing that song. Okay, so onwards. So they talked about Lord Hax, who's currently the mayor in this campaign, and Wulfric declared the captain of the militia be a completely separate office. And I know Lord Melinius is trying to get that position. So, further down. Now there's the Mounted Borderers. The Mounted Borderers are an elite force. They're handpicked by the Viscount to patrol the Viscounty. And the article here is a full description of what they are, their culture, how to get in, their missions, their groups, the life that they lead, relationships with other organizations and challenges and conflicts. So this is all vital information. I even have rumors here. So this is a lot of this information I got from the Living Greyhawk modules, ventures in the area, so I can use it in my campaign. So because in the campaign, they're going to come across the Mounted Borderers often. It's going to happen. Either they're going to come to their rescue, or they're going to catch the players doing something they shouldn't be doing, or there'll be a good source of rumors of what's happening in the Viscounty. Currently, the Mounted Borderers number 100. They patrol the Viscounty in groups of 5, each group led by a knight banneret. Obviously, that's not going to be a hedge knight, because a hedge knight is more like a vagabond or an adventurer, and he actually has duties that with that organization, and he serves the Viscount himself. Besides these forces, the Verbobonc's demi-humans take part in the city's defenses. The elves have formed their own militia. It's much smaller than the standing army. They only have 64 of them, but these elves are all veterans of the Fey Kingdom of Selene to the south. Many are both spellcasters and fighters, and easily worth twice their number in human troops. The Viscount can also call up the gnomes from the Cron Hills in times of need, although he's loath to do so on account of the trade concessions which the gnomes generally demand for their aid. That happened during the Battle of Emerald Meadows. That's how they got a position on the Council of Lords. The gnomes number 5,000 when fully mustered, but they can only be raised with the support of the Gnome King, Prince Jim. And Prince Jim's right here. He's a young gnome prince. He has a mansion in the city here. We talk about politics, and so this is good information. And one of the adventures I run early on in the campaign, the players notice gnome troubles in the city. They come across some arguments, reports of disturbances by the gnomes, and that usually can lead to the meeting of Prince Jim himself at his manor. And then while they're there, things can happen in a module that I have for that area. And then it's possible for the adventurers to get involved with the gnome troubles and to find out what's really going on. Who's attacking their caravans and why merchandise are not getting to the right merchants in the area and why their merchandise is ending up somewhere else, like in divers instead. So it's possible if the campaign to go in that direction if the players pursue that line. If they pursue the clues, it'll lead them to the actual Tolver in the Greenway Valley, the capital of the gnomes. So Verbobonc itself, though, it has a force of about 200 gnomes that can be called upon. They are primarily merchants and reluctant to take up arms. They will only do so at the request of their gnome prince. The city can count on the guardians, the holy warriors of Trithurin. Trithurin, the god of individuality, liberty, retribution, and self-defense. Remember, I mentioned earlier, they're the instrumental of driving back the forces of Ardi from the Great Kingdom hundreds of years ago. Although their number are constantly in flux, they are a significant number in the city at this time, as Verbobonc is the site of the greatest temple to Trithurin in all the Flanaess. So this is the center. So this is the headquarters of Trithurin himself. This order, numbering over 5,000 knights, and can be counted on to rally to the city's defense if the need should arise. However, as they are scattered throughout the Flanaess, it would take quite a while for them to assemble into the city. Finally, Mayor Hax's Hardheads, as his volunteers have been begun to call themselves, numbering almost 500 men, and all the veterans of the Greyhawk Wars too. So about Mayor Hax. He's also in charge of taxes. He's the tax collector. Hax's Hardheads are the tax collectors. And there's a whole article on them and their personality and what they do and their activities, which isn't always in the player's favor. They could become a problem, especially when the players bring back a lot of loot to the city. Also, there's a strong base of power for the young noble and constant source of worry to the Viscount. Okay, religion. Very important in this campaign. My campaign is called the Cults of Greyhawk, and obviously the key points on my campaign is based on cults, what they're up to, their activities. And the Temple of Elemental Evil has several of them, and they work with many. As an independent city devoted to individuality and freedom, Verbobonc is teeming with religious diversity. Most non-evil deities are worshipped openly in the city, many represented by established churches and temples and shrines. Further, rumors speak of secretive cults practicing all sorts of foul deeds, although most agree they are just rumors. Well, I've got a few things to say about that. If you look at the map, there are many churches and shrine locations on the map with full detailed articles. One of the reasons I did that to give players options of playing a cleric or a druid or a paladin of one of the churches of the gods that they decide to follow. In the campaign, a lot of the organizations are doing their own thing. They have their own concerns, and they come into play during the campaign with the players. And so when you have legitimate locations detailed at different cities and villages with actual priests and bishops and archbishops fully fleshed out, the players can actually go there and talk to them and actually get quests from them or interact with them, along with the lords of the land as well. The main faith in Verbobonc is that of St. Cuthbert, and he has been declared the official patron of the city. His priesthood is everywhere, and next to the Viscount and the Lord Mayor. His priesthood is everywhere, and next to the Viscount and Lord Mayor Hax, the Bishop of Verbobonc is the most powerful man in the city. While always a popular deity within the city, the worship of St. Cuthbert has virtually exploded since the Battle of Emerald Meadows. In fact, a new temple, second only to the Temple of Trithurin, has recently built in the center of the city's commercial market. And I kind of pointed that out earlier when we were looking at the map. The current bishop, Bishop Hoffren, is from the Viscounty. So I have a description of him, what he looks like when you meet him, and everything about him and his politics right there. So he was born to a peasant family on the outskirts of Verbobonc. Hoffren made a name for himself as a defender of the poor. He fought in the army at the Battle of Emerald Meadows and saved Wulfric's life during an ambush in the Cron Hills. For this deed, he was knighted by Wulfric and received the Golden Crown badge of Prince Thrommel IV, Marshal of Thirandi. himself. Upon his return to Verbobonc, he was installed as the Viscount's new bishop. The church's success in the Verbobonc is largely due to his influence. Though upright and gentle-hearted, he can be quite zealous in the promotion of St. Cuthbert's creed. As he is a firm believer in the protocol of social rank, he will rarely see commoners, leaving lesser priests to tend to their cares. While he prizes reason and common sense, he is never known to procrastinate in the matters of importance, and is just as often quick to action. About that, there's some adventures in my campaign where they do interact with him because of a special mission they're on. He's detailed out along with some of his subordinates too that they talked to initially. During the wars, though, this inclination towards action led to a split between himself and Wulfric. That statement right there is from the Marklands War of the year 594 Common Year, so that wouldn't be relevant to this campaign. So he talked about drifting from his influence, so we'll skip all that. Next to St. Cuthbert is Tritheren, the most popular. His temple dominates the civic center, plaza, and much of the religious life of the city revolves around it. The numbers of his faith have diminished greatly over the last century. Most have been lost to the Church of St. Cuthbert. However, the Cathedral of Tritheren is still a force to be reckoned with in Verbobonc, especially considering the uniqueness of its history within the city, which I've referred to before. And when it comes to role-playing in the campaign, I have a speech, a sermon that they present outdoors on holy days, and it starts a riot. The riot that he encourages turns the people against the gnomes and the lords, and usually it causes a lot of trouble, much to the concern of the local city guard. They have their hands full on those days, and they do not look forward to it. So so Wulfric has his hands full when it comes to political matters from Tritheren. They're always stirring up trouble. And if a player decides to become a paladin or a cleric of Tritheren, he would get more involved in that. And you would have to and you probably want to encourage that in the campaign with special missions from the bishop himself to the player. And then, of course, any interactions with any of the lords in the campaign on different missions might come into jeopardy because of his attitude or his decisions in that adventure, which will make the campaign much more interesting. So it goes on about the original church was destroyed during the Long Siege in the year 412 Common Year. I believe the Long Siege referred to the invasion of their Iardi from the Great Kingdom. We'll skip all that. The article continues that the Cathedral of Tritheren occupies a special place in the religious life of the city, a particular mystique surrounding its origins. Talks about gnomes, elves, and human architects, mages that contributed to the construction of the building. And that's all described in that article of that location. But it's interesting, though. But what's interesting campaign-wise is pilgrims from all across the Flanaess flocked to Verbobonc just to see it, and none left disappointed. So when I roleplay the city, I portray it as a tourist site. There's mobs, especially on Holy Day, on God's Day. Many of the locals from the surrounding countryside flock to the city to pray on God's Day at the different cathedrals and churches. And many come to the cathedral itself of Tritheren. And many of the foreigners come visiting flock here to see the sights. The Civic Center Plaza and the Temple Square becomes packed with throngs of people, visitors, looking at the sites, attending sermons. So what this does is it symbolizes the diversity of Earth's deities, as well as individual freedom to worship any of them. As such, small shrines surround the temple, one devoted to almost every god and goddess, including the dark gods. Its ceiling is an incredible mosaic, so it goes on about what the place looks like. The current high-ranking priest is the Archbishop himself, Cornelius Arx. Is perhaps the city's most respected soul. Formerly of the City of Greyhawk, Cornelius left Greyhawk for Verbobonc in 550 Common Year. He has been the high priest of the Cathedral of Tritheren for over 30 years. He's 90 years old right now. So if a player has a background from Tritheren, then it's possible he might have met him or talked to him, or he even might be on a special mission for him, or later in the campaign you might be, as he becomes known for his successes. So the worship of Rayo itself has suffered of late within Verbobonc. During the Elemental War, many of the Rayo's faithful turned to a more militant worship, St. Cuthbert. Although some returned, this sentence right here, the widespread wars saw diminishing of the followers, that would be referring to the Marklands Wars, which is not relevant to this campaign. But the worship of Rayo is mostly limited to the Verbobonc's nobility. That's what I use in my campaign right there. The players will notice that. While most of the Viscounty's leadership pays its respects to the power of reason, the increased call of action has further isolated them from the commoners. So when the players notice a shrine or a temple of Rayo, it's usually filled with nobility and extended family of the nobility. And and also the lords will have their own chapel within their manor or castle, and they'll have a dedicated altar room to Rayo and an in-house priest of Rayo. Marcellus Legume, the patriot of the Church of Rayo, has been in Verbobonc for less than a decade. So he's there in case a player decides to become a priest or a paladin of Rayo, or one of the quests has the players interact with the Church of Rayo itself. And there is an adventure out there that talks about that with Valluna. The Archbishop of Rayo himself is located in Valluna. And there's a module that deals with a staff of Rayo or crook of Rayo that can be returned to them. And then that adventure is further along in the campaign, which requires a higher level party. So we'll skip past that. It talks about more shrines to the Gnomes and Elven gods can be found in the city. These generally take form of small shrines tucked into the walls along Verbobonc streets. Although a handful exist beyond the city walls, those are keyed. There's even a couple shrines in some of the inns and taverns. These are generally managed by the demi-humans of the city, but most humans pay homage to them as well. This is especially true for those who intend to travel through the lands of the Viscounty and the demi-human realms of the beyond, like Selene or the Gnarly Forest. Taxes. So here we go. Tax collection is responsibility and position of the Lord Mayor of Verbobonc. Currently, the Lord Mayor is Lord Marcos Willem Hax, Lord Hax. And taxes are collected by Hax's hardheads. That article says that everyone except nobility is not allowed to resist a lawful tax collection. How much is taxed, how you must submit to a search, what happens if you resist being searched, how much is taxed, you're taking everything I got response. That's not legal response. If you're affiliated with House Hax, then this describes what happens. And then if you're part of the Mounted Borderers, or all this came from the Living Greyhawk campaign, and it's great use in the campaign in case something like this happens. I only have the tax collectors bother the party if the players come to the Verbobonc loaded with lots of treasure. So they're going to be taxed with adventuring tax, and that's pretty steep, of 50%. And actually, they will try to take all of it, and that's all described in that article I have that I got from the Living Greyhawk meta organization. Honorifics talks about titles, who's called what. In general, the ruling class of Verbobonc is disdainful of those without titles or positions. Titles of nobility and rank matter greatly to those without titles. Gentlemen and peasants are not unimportant, but they are simply not of the same social class. Wealth and power have little to do with it. Furthermore, rank without nobility is important. Those of lesser status are expected to show deference to their superiors. Even the commoners of Verbobonc suffer from the arrogance of the class. Gentlemen do not associate with simple peasants. Tradesmen are better than merchants. Merchants are above common laborers. The Rene, gypsies, are considered gypsies of the river, outcasts, and river pirates. They're way at the bottom. This comes to role-playing terms in the campaign with the players. A lot of lords look down their noses at adventurers, but they do realize how dangerous they are, so they're treated carefully. But players are still commoners, typically, and they can't just arrest a noble for anything they've seen the noble do or heard, or any evidence. The only thing they can do is present their information to maybe another noble, or the mounted guard, or the mounted borderers, or a mayor of a village, or a constable. They can't accost a lord to accuse them or try to arrest them. If they try that, they'll at the least get whipped, or maybe even killed or hung. So the players have very little power when it comes to lords, and they have to be very careful in this campaign, because I have so many lords running around requesting help from players or coming across them in their activities. And some of the lords are in conjunction with a lot of the organizations that are involved in the Temple of Elemental Evil. So the players have to be really careful about this. And also, it's quite possible that the players will be serving a lord or two themselves on these missions with a lot of respect. And the only way to get on the good side of lords is by accomplishing these missions successfully and gaining their respect. And then you'll become a noted friend of that house. And it comes with a lot of privileges, from supplies to information to help. And that's a good thing for the players to do in the campaign, especially endgame, when the players are high enough level after all their successes that they might be granted land, a castle, a fort with some villages, or a tower or something, depending on the class. And that's where that comes into play. And it makes it quite interesting. So, we'll keep going. Demographics, almost 80% human. There's 9% elf, 5% gnome, 3% halfling, 2% dwarf, and 1% half-elf. The dwarves come from the Lower Middle Mountains mostly. I have an entire campaign section and adventures focused on dwarves. And if a player decides to be a dwarf, I usually incorporate that into their background to be used later in an adventure hook. So the government is a semi-independent realm, fealty to the Archclerisy of Luna. Defenses, the First Army of the Church, Cuthra Beans, talks about that. Industry and trade is usually copper, gems, timber from the forest. Guilds and factions. I describe the Knights of the Heart. It has a local branch here. And then we have the history. The history can be an entire article on its own, but I have it all written out here. I'm never going to read this to the players, but I keep this stuff in mind to be used in role-playing with different NPCs in the campaign. If I wanted to, if the players were interested, they could find this actual history in a book. Like the wizard from the Wizards Guild could actually access his library, or one of the priests can do the same thing to get this information, and they're welcome to read it. I don't hold them back from that if they want to. I also have a separate article written for that as well. Geography, gnarly forests, Cron hills, plains, rivers, and resources. So on the right-hand side, I have the laws, which needs its own article as well. Common laws, and then we have some punishments of fines and labor time outlined on the right-hand side here. Like spell casting in public is 10 gold pieces, or 5 days in jail. Drawing a blade, for example, is 5 gold or 5 days in jail. So what's interesting about the laws here is these only apply to commoners. Most of them do not apply to a lord. As you can see, I do have an article I wrote for the laws of the Viscounty. I pulled this together from a couple of different sources. So the idea here is there's high crimes and low crimes, and then there's legal authority and the right of justice, and the penal code. All this I put together to help determine when the players get into trouble or not. There's legal jurisdiction in the Verbobonc, different organizations. So there's high authority of high justice and low justice. Knights of the Defender of the Faith have high justice. That means they get their authority directly from the Viscount himself. The Mounted Borderers only have authority over low justice and the location of their jurisdiction. So you get the different organizations here of what they're allowed to have. Clerics have an interesting position in the hierarchy of the laws. Without getting into too much detail, that's what I have outlined. I might make a video of that in the future. So back to the main article, we got the Verbobonc honorifics. The Viscount is his noble lordship. The Bishop is his holiness. Baron is prominence. Lord Mayor, Knight Commander, Abbot, all the way down to the Yeoman. So when it comes to role playing, this would become useful if you can remember to do it. So also on the right hand side, we get the population of 12,000. So we have different districts. Now this is where it becomes even more detailed. So we're going to start off with beyond the walls. This article right here describes what's outside the walls of Verbobonc. What we see here is different locations on the right. This links to more locations. You can get to these locations directly from the map, or just click on the links to the left. Right here we have the Silver Lie Inn, number 813, and that would be also over here. And so I can easily locate this inn with a description and everything. So outside the city walls is barracks, animal training, the pond, the aqueduct, one of the ruins of the School of Magic, a couple shrines, several inns, and a tower of the Conjurer Master of the Silver Consortium, which is a mage guild. He's all outside. These are all locations outside the walls. Back to the main article, we have the business quarter. In the business quarter, we have many locations detailed here. So before even looking at these articles, these are mostly located around here, between the marketplace of the docks and to the north up here. So I have a little interesting thing about trade. The trade limit of the city is 40,000 gold. In case the players try to take advantage of the situation, I do have a maximum here. When I also describe purchasing items from the market, so how much you can buy and how much it costs, and how long it takes to find something. Like potions are available 125% of the list price. Then the availability of per day searching. Spells, scrolls, it's all here. Masterwork items, 75% per day of looking. Cost is these items will cost list price and take time to find. So it's all described here. And then below is selling regular items on the market, how much you're willing to get. Non-magical items can be sold for 50% of the list price. I usually, when I run a game, I usually start it off at 25%, and I just have them role play it, and then maybe do a charisma check to see if they can get the price higher. But this is the guidelines here. I like guidelines, so it gives you a basis of where to go from. Selling items to a specific store, more guidelines on how to handle that. Security and religion. This is part of the city guard that keeps a watchful eye on this section of town. But many religious institutions supervise this section as well. These priests don't just hide in their temples. They're active in the area too. In fact, that brings up a point. More often than not, the guards are accompanied by a priest, a billet of St. Cuthbert. And they're very proactive in their upholding the law, where you might talk your way out of a situation with a warning from a guard, but if there's a billet along with them, good luck. It's not going to be good. They usually have a cudgel ready to beat you over the head with it. So anyway, the priests also support the area. So one of the things they can do is determine that an item is properly identified. They can detect any cursed items. They can detect evil items. They can determine fair negotiations. So they're all available for that, for these different churches like Zilchus, which is quite interesting. I'm not going to go through every location, but as you can see, there's quite a few of them. I added this one myself. A player background wanted to have his family from a bread market, a bakery. So I created a custom bakery for him, for his family, where he's from in his background of his character. His name is Pavla Meyer. And he really appreciated that. He felt special. So I added that as a location in the city. There's a bookstore. There's lots of chapels and guilds and armories and merchant houses, spice store, silver shops. The Manor of Prince Jim is right here at B6. I have flavor text and description of the location, notable people that are there, his article, of course. Each room of his house I have described because I have an adventure that involves an encounter at his location. So I wanted to make sure I was prepared for it. Also in the area is the new Temple of Cuthbert, importers, scribes and paper, more temples, more taverns, a trader's market. The trader's market's interesting because players will often go there looking for stuff. At the market itself, it's described the location, what you can be found there. That would be the business quarter, what you see here on the screen. It's this part of the city, all these locations. The next quarter would be the Civic Center Plaza. That's located here, more along the top half here, in this square right here and all the buildings around it. It's the center of politics and religion of the city and Viscounty. Centrally located within the city, this area is a large collection of the most prestigious churches and the city's civic buildings. Streets are very wide, accommodate the great multitude of people in the area. Tourists, priests, the faithful, civic employees, and others crowd this area during the daylight hours. The area is frequently patrolled by the city watch in an attempt to keep crime down, but pickpockets are still abound in this lucrative area. The streets are filled with side street chapels, faithful preaching to the crowds, small shrines, and carts. Although not as prominent as the business district, the Civic Center also boasts its share of street vendors and beggars. Also, the city guards are often seen giving directions to the people. The locations here are the Archer's Eye, which is a Boer Fletcher, banker, a cathedral of Trithrin, the City Hall, a community house, the Constabulary, Guild of Architects, Masons, and Carpenters, a place called the Items of Note, musical instruments, a bard shop, Giley's Inn, which is a famous inn that I usually have my nobles stay at when they're in town. Actually, one of my adventures do start there. A lawyer's guild, Lord Langmire's Manor, one of the lords of the Viscounty, the Silver Consortium, which is the Mage Guild, one of 2 mage guilds in the city, the Academy of Farsight, which is basically a school of a university of learning. The College Lane is a tavern which many of the students of the academy go there. The University of Lear, which is the greatest library in the entire city. The Spruce Goose Inn, which is the most expensive inn you can stay in Verbobonc. Then there's Zeebel's Maroon Mon, which is an exotic Eastern flavor tavern that you can enjoy yourself at. And that's the locations in that area of town. So let's go back to the next. The next one is the Elven Quarter. And then this location is located in the top right-hand corner of the map, where all the ip trees are. I have a verbose description flavor text that describes the area, but the beautiful glittering spires of white towers, unmatched by any found in human settlements. It describes how beautiful it is. Then, of course, more about the plant life. A brief history for a short time, the common year 185 to 189. This section of the land was the seat of the Elven Principality of Kyrim. Temporary pavilions are often raised here with poetry and music and performed day and night in this section of town. It describes guilds of the Grey Elves, the High Elves, Sylvan Elves. Of late, a rift has grown between the Elven Enclave and the Elven clans of the Gnarly Forest. So the Elves of the Gnarly Forest, just 4 clans there, by the way. They view the members of this Elven Enclave as traitors to their race, for the most pacifistic attitudes towards the Viscounty. So basically what they believe is the Elven Enclave is too accepting of the Viscounty itself, of the people here, of the government. While members of the Elven Enclave deny these accusations, it's nevertheless created a strain in the Elven way of life. Members of the Elven Enclave see this as their duty to work towards peaceful reconciliation between the Verbobonc, the Elven clans, and the Enclave. So it talks about membership of the Elven Enclave is limited to Elven and half-Elven characters of Verbobonc. So if an Elven character, when they create their character up at the beginning of the campaign, they have some choices of where their elf could be from. They could be from Selene, the Fairy Kingdom to the south. They could be from one of the 4 clans of the Gnarly Forest, which is a little bit more wild and secular. Or they could be from the Elven Enclave here in Verbobonc, which is more a city-type elf, but more learned. So this is all part of the politics as well. So if a party decides to be from one of these locations and they visit another, they're going to have to role-play that. The DM will have to challenge them on their political stance of how things are, how they will be viewed by the other party. So, like an elf from the city, when he goes to visit the clans in Gnarly Forest, he's going to be looked upon with some concern based on this political information here. And the locations here in the city. The locations here in the Elven Quarter are the Ash Horn. It's a meeting area, religious. This location is an Elven religious area called Pond of the Heart. Reshif, a druid, runs this location. It's a sacred location of the elves from the very beginning, before humans came along, and they guard it, and they take care of it very well. It's dedicated to the elven god Corlin Larathane. They meet here on holy days 3 times a month. The elves in the area can be seen in a long procession in the mouth of the stream, each wearing their gold and white robes, singing in perfect harmony. So that's an interesting thing that players could notice, or that one of the player characters that's elven from this area might have to participate in or know about. The next location is the barracks. That's the elven barracks that I mentioned earlier in the defense of the city. And then we have the Basilica of the Four Seasons. That's the Elven Inn. A lot of elven dignitaries come here. In fact, this is a church that has 4 wings in dedication to the Iridian agricultural gods: Atro, Citulin, Teltur, and Wenta. Each wing has its own separate clergy and high priest. If the players happen to worship one of these gods, then they would possibly know who these priests are or be from here if they're from the city. The next location is called the Hindsight. This location is a shrine to Istis, the goddess of fate, destiny, divination, future, and honesty. Hindsight is a little-known store located at the base of an ipt tree in the Elven district. This is a great location for a plot point in the storyline, or to get a prophecy read to them, or a prophecy, or one of the prophecies in the campaign, the meaning of it described to them. The next location is the Shrine of Farlan. It's a small bridge across the Knives Run. It's devoted to Farlan worshippers. It's an ornately carved wooden bridge. It's quite unique. Its location is in the Elven district and completely made of Elven worshippers hundreds of years ago. The grand spans of the bridge are made from ipt trees. Some are still living, and the wood carvings have not shown any sign of age. The entire deck and railings of the bridge have been etched to form one large road map of the Viscounty. The map scale is done such that it covers a geographic area of 80 miles to the east and south and north of the city, 250 miles east and west of the city. All legends and notes on the map are written in Elvish. The next location is a tavern called the Familiar Roast. This one I'm going to pay a little bit more attention to. This is the main inn in the Elven district, and this is the main Elven inn in the Elven Enclave district, and it's quite famous in Elven circles. Notable people is run by the druid Resif, who is in charge of that pond. What's interesting about this inn, that it serves as a meeting place for a lot of druids and rangers from the nearby gnarly forest. A lot of times they come into the city disguised as birds. They avoid detection into the city and meet here to discuss all manner of Sylvan issues. The last location is the Red Dawn Inn. This is a grand building, a large inn of the Elven district. It mainly caters to elves, but all manner of clientele are welcome. Each room is ornately carved of the finest wood. It basically looks like one of the inns that you would find in an Elven enclave in like the gnarly forest. What's interesting, though, is visiting elves and wealthy wishing to experience the elf life are typically visitors to this inn. Occasionally, diplomats from Selene can be found resting here during their travels, and many elves gather in the large central room to find out about elven affairs and news. Sometimes the head of the Elven Luna Knights, Melf, is seen here after deliberations as a diplomat with the Viscount and the Lords of Verbobonc. A player that's an elf could actually be from this tavern. Maybe served. Maybe his parents work in this tavern, or that he hangs out here because for the excitement and rumors to find excitement and adventure. And it's a good starting point for a player to start the game, to find a hook to get them involved with the other players in the group. So that's all the locations I have described in the Elven Dawn Quarter. The next location is Gnomesburg. Gnomesburg is one of the original settlements in the area, and they have quite a few locations that you can come visit. They have a brewery, a cheese house, a clothing store, a gnome palace, and then of course the old house of Jim, Prince Jim, the Crown Prince of the Crown Hills. He no longer lives there. And then the Brass Rail, which is another tavern, a guild of millers, and the Rusty Nail, which is another tavern, which is interesting. The notable people here, it's for the gnomes. It is run by Snipple Bimplenose. He's the owner. He's a very large nose, even for a gnome, and is a subject of much bragging in the tavern. If a gnome didn't want to be from the Crown Hills, this would be a very good place to come from, Gnomesburg, in the city here. Okay, the next quarter would be the High Quarter. The High Quarter is a place where a lot of the nobility lives. This section of the city is named for its lifestyle and its elevation. This section is located along the edge of a small hill in the center of the city. It's some 20 to 30 feet higher than the rest of the city. And that would be located on the map here between Castle Wilfric and the Cathedral of Trithrin. It's hard to tell, but the line along south, the line right above the riverbank is a higher elevation where the castle is, and that upper elevation continues all the way up to the Cathedral of Trithrin. And it's really hard to tell if you scroll in, but you see the elevation of the streets are different. So this location underneath the bridge is one elevation, and then up here is an upper higher elevation. So the elevation continues along here, and these are stairs going up along this street. And here's another set of stairs going up along the street to the Cathedral of Trithrin. So from C13 on up is a higher elevation. All the way down, A2 is higher and A1 is higher elevation. It's hard to tell with this map, but that's what this, if you look close, you'll see that. So the High Quarter is up there, and this area of the city is under constant watch by city patrols, day and night. So the locations here is the Harvester Theater, which is now ruined by fire. It was a theater of fine arts, but it's been burned down because of a conflict between different factions. Then the next is the House of Timmick. He's not the mayor currently. Then there's the House of Villison. He's the captain of the militia. Then there's Lady Catherine's Manor. She's one of the minor lords in the city. Then there's Lord Hax's Manor. He's the Lord Mayor. Lord Melinius has a manor here as well. Then there's the Monastery of the Reverend Brothers of Rayo. So that's something that's in my campaign that has great importance. What's interesting is the Monastery of Rayo is right here. It's attached to the Castle of Wilfric, underneath the walls there. So it comprises where you see the A1, right below to the right of the A1 is the actual entrance into the monastery, underneath that guardhouse. And then you're looking at a tower, and then across from the tower is another building, and to the left is another building. So these are all, it's a complex, it's a large complex of worship halls and study for Rayo. And one of the reasons it's positioned here beneath in the High Quarter and the castle is because a lot of the nobility and lords worship Rayo, so it's a perfect location for them. The next location is Nichols' House of Silk, a fine establishment for buying fine clothing. The old Temple of St. Cuthbert, which is still being used by the bishop himself while the new Temple of Cuthbert is being constructed. And that location is right here just north. That location is on the northern border of the High Quarter. It's behind the Cathedral of Trithrin and the castle itself. And then you have a store of collectibles. And then you have the Verbobonc Mint, which is basically a bank. The bank is located right in front of the castle itself. The Royal Mint produces all the coins of the Viscounty. The building's construction is the height of Gnomis design for functionality and security. It's heavily guarded. It's a mint for both Thirandi and Verbobonc currencies have similar styles. Okay, that finishes the location of the High Quarter. And then the next location is the refugee camps. They're located out near the city walls. Ryemend is a small town that was located directly across the Veldiva River from Verbobonc. It had always been a receiving port in the town of Verbobonc's trade goods across the river. It's only been a few years after the Great Bridge had been created. This small town became annexed into the city. So the small town is located right here, next to the Gnome Quarter. It's on the Thirandi side of the river. So when Verbobonc gained its independence from Thirandi in the common year 529, this portion of the city is the only land on the north side of the Velverdiva River that belonged to the Viscounty. The wealth of the city and its unique location has kept the Verbobonc Ryemend of particular interest to those in Firond. Both Duke Taineman and King Belvor IV in Firond have a network of spies in Ryemend to keep all eye on Verbobonc to make sure that the relations remain positive. The Knights of the Heart sometimes come here to meet agents of Verbobonc to learn about events to the south. This is a good way for Furondi to get information about the activities of the players, of what they've been up to, of the problems that were happening in the southern part of the Viscounty. And if Furondi was to get involved in any way, they'd probably receive the news first from this source. So we got the mill, we have another banner. So locations here would be the mill, and a manor for one of the lords. There's stables here that you can purchase horses from. There's a jewelry store here. The House of Cards is actual tavern, a gambling establishment. There's an apothecary, a herb shop. It's one of the few places you can get herbs in the city. The Laughing Rogue Hostel and Chapel is an actual shrine dedicated to Aldemara, which is which is run by priests of Aldemara. They're usually on duty at this chapel. There's 3 of them. People come here to perform, to drink, to party. It's a good location for somebody that worships that god. That's a rogue in the campaign to come from, with some diverse backgrounds that could be created with a lot of imagination around this location. The Riverside Inn and the Seasonal Inns Inn, they have their own little backgrounds and history and notable NPCs there. Okay, the last location is the walls and towers themselves of Verbobonc. So here it talks about the North Gate. Above the gate it says Earth and Stone, Man and Gnome. It talks about Castle Greyfish, and basically it's a full description of the outer walls, what they look like, and the defenses of the city, where the barracks are located at. It talks about the inner walls, the elven walls, how they're defended, the city gates themselves. Here, there's usually 3 guards at first level and a paladin at first level to use his detect evil all day. I don't do that in my campaign because I think that's too many paladins in the world. I think that's a strange use of resources of paladins of the faith to be guard duty at a gate. So I don't do that. Also, there's a guard dog at each gate too. The features of each gate and tower. Each gatehouse has a tower 40 feet tall, describes all that. A porticus, bars, reinforced doors. It talks about the trade gate itself, the northwest side of the river. We got a description of the north gate, the east high gate, the south way low gate, the river, the bridge. The river is 608 feet wide at that point. It's as deep as 45 feet. So boats of that size can traverse the river. And actually, a bit of history here, in the year 156 Common Year, the RD forces built the bridge. It was a massive project that took most of the Legion and most of the wizards to accomplish. This is that siege I referred to earlier that the priest and Knights of Trithrin defended against. The bridge has an old RD look. It looks like a Romish bridge. 2 wagons at a time, side by side, across it. Then we have more description of the river. The Knives Run is named after a legendary gnome adventurer, Knive Serbos. The river is about 140 feet wide. A description of that. Talks about the streets are mostly cobblestone, with the depression down the center to catch rainwater. That's a little bit of detail that's useful in describing what the city looks like to the party as they go through the city. I have a description of what the city lights are. In the High Quarter, there's a continual flame spell, and these lights hang from building awnings of about 7 feet high. It describes the gnome section and the elven section. The different neighborhoods, a description of the city neighborhoods, of the construction, the gnomish construction, of the domes that reflect the sun, and mounds and dome-shaped roofs that take advantage of the space under the hill in the gnome section. So it's all interesting, little tidbits for detail of describing the city itself. Okay, so my voice is starting to give out on me. This is a long video. Let's go to the last section, Waterfront District. The Waterfront District has many locations. I got a full description to read to the players on both the docks and small boats. This is the description I commented on earlier about the river boats. Smaller boats rub up against each other as they bob on the incoming tide. Dock workers swarm over larger craft, collecting cargo for importing or else swabbing down the decks. Further up the shore, away from the water's edge, some of the fisher people are carefully going about over their nets, while others are involved in trying to scrape off barnacles and parasites from the hulls of their boats. These are all things I added to this information I wrote myself to help flush out the actual city. So I take information and I rework it and I add a lot to it. So that way I can improve upon what somebody else has done. And then of course these verbose descriptions are something I have to write up myself. The locations here are the Electrum Eel Inn. It's for sailors and adventurers. It's a great place for adventurers to meet. It's right there on the docks. The Mercantile Exchange is a large warehouse-type building where they do a lot of trade. Buy almost anything. As soon as they're unloaded off the boats, they end up in here. Office of the Harbor Master. If the players have any reason to deal with the Harbor Masters because they were on a boat that came in with some merchandise, and so he would be interacted with for that reason. He'd also probably report any loot that the party has if they come into the city that way, and get hold of the hardheads, Hax's hardheads, to come collect taxes from them. Also, there's the Temple of the Valdiver River. That temple is dedicated to the god of the river, Osprey. Osprey is the god of sea voyages, ships, and sailors. I actually created a sermon for that god to be used for role-playing purposes when they walk into the temple. Then we have the River's Edge General Store. We have the Tower of the Superintendent of the Waterworks, and we have a Maiden's Tavern, another tavern right there on the docks, and the warehouses. We have an encounter there with the gnomes in my campaign, so the players have to go there to stop the gnomes from burning down the warehouse, which is located right here behind this Mercantile Exchange, this big building. And this is the Adventurers Guild. If there's members of the party that grew up here, I usually have them say in their background that they came here daily to check the notice board to see if there's any groups getting together to go adventuring. And that's how I introduce them to the campaign, because a notice does get put up to go to Xylee's Inn because Lord needs their help. So this is all really engaging locations to incorporate into the campaign to hook the players in. That's all the locations for the Waterfront District. So back to the main article. We have articles on, of course, all the NPCs, all the lords, the Viscount himself, all these characters on location, and all these plots that I created of things that are happening throughout the city. So basically, this is the full breakdown of the City of Verbobonc, of what I've done with it. It'll take hours to go over every detail of the video, so this is my overview of it. So hopefully some of you might find it helpful in your campaigns. I'll go ahead and put a lot of this information on my Patreon so you can access some of the articles there that I wrote. But of course, I can't put everything up there because it wouldn't be my material. If you have any suggestions or recommendations or advice of what you would like to see in future videos, go ahead and post that below. And I thank you for watching my long video on the City of Verbobonc. Thank you for watching, and have a good time gaming.